not only in Nashville but across the country. Things just increasingly begin to worry us about exposing each other to what's happening right this minute. We had already made a decision to not have the class grades 1 through 3 where we had the problem last week, and as we began to think about it, it just became more problematic for us. We met with the deacons yesterday morning on Zoom and got their feedback, and as we started talking about this morning and the immediate future, we just came to the conclusion that right now we did not need to be putting folks into small classrooms. This is a temporary thing. We're not making a decision for the whole quarter or anything of that nature, but for the time being, we decided we would be best served by staying in this room. We're blessed to have a facility that has a lot of space, a lot of airspace. We can spread out, and so we decided to utilize that. In deciding what to do during the first hour, we also got the deacon's input on that, but we decided to try to cater it a little more to the kids since they were losing their classes. If this is going to last very long, we will amend what we're doing. We've got several different things that have been suggested from the deacons and from within our own number as directions we can go, but hopefully it will be short-lived and we can get back to classes again before too long. But in the meantime, temporarily at least, Stephen's going to do a lesson at 9 that is catered to the young people, but hopefully all of us will get something out of it. He says he'll throw with us adults a few bones too, so I know he will do that. I want you to know that this was not something that we arrived at easily. Decisions like this weigh on us. We know how valuable our classes are. This church family has always put a lot of energy and emphasis into our classes for our young people, and we did not give that up lightly. But for the time being, we decided we would be best served by staying in here. So we're looking forward to what Stephen's got prepared for us this morning, and we'll turn it over to him.
All right, we have some things that are a little interactive this morning. If you have a Bible, you can turn it over to the book of Esther. We're going to look kind of an overview of the story of Esther and see some of the things that were going on. And if you're younger than 12, or maybe 18 or 100, and you have these things, let's practice. So if you've got them, put them up in the air. There we go. And wiggle the fingers. Okay, so there'll be questions. And when there are questions, if you want to answer, that's what you do. You don't have to put both up. Just one works. But if you don't put your hand up, I don't know that you want to say something. So raise your hands and we'll call on you. Now, Esther is a story about a whole bunch of people, and we just focused really on 3 or 4 of them. And you should have gotten a coloring page or a couple coloring pages when you came in. And if you don't have one and you want one, and it doesn't matter, there's no age limit on the coloring pages. If you would like one, there are some young men here who'd be happy to pass them out. So just let me know if you need it. So Esther is written after people are starting to come back from captivity. And it's around 480 BC, just to kind of put it in perspective, maybe for people who are a little bit older. The Israelites, or the people from Judah, have started to go back around 80 years earlier. Or so, and now we're finding ourselves, or 50 years earlier or so, and we're finding ourselves now under a Persian king, and he's married to the granddaughter of the last king of Babylon. So when you look at Vashti, does anybody remember the name of the last king of Babylon? Maybe somebody in middle school or high school? I know that's an odd fact to pull out of the air. Does anybody remember? What's Daniel's name in Babylonian? Or Chaldean? Belteshazzar. So remember the king's name? Very similar. You can answer if you're older too. Belshazzar, yeah. So Belshazzar is Vashti's, when we get into the story, if you remember who Vashti is, Belshazzar is Vashti's either father or grandfather. It's hard to tell sometimes when Babylon, they don't really keep those things clear. Everybody is your father. Her father or her grandfather. And so when you get into the story, that might help explain some of the things that are going on in chapter 1. Now, have you ever had anything that you're really proud of? Maybe something that you wanted to show off to your friends? What is something that you have that you're really proud of that you want to show off to other people? Yes. A Nerf gun. Yes. Gregory got a new Nerf gun. Thank you, Lynn. And he has been shooting people with it. That's how he shows it to you. So if you're invited over to our house and he wants to show you the Nerf gun, get ready to duck. But why do we do that? Why do we like to share our things and show them to people? Some of it's vanity, yeah. We're like, look at what I have. Why else? Yeah, it's who we are. We like to show our things because it's part of our life, and we just show, right? That's just what people do. And if you don't have anything to show, you tell stories. Like when I was growing up, we didn't have so much, so we told lots of stories, and we showed our stories to each other. Right? So we like to do that. Well, you start off in Esther, and the king really likes to show things to people. And for a really long time, he is showing everybody all of his stuff. Have you ever been to a party that lasts like 180 days? What if we were going to have a birthday party for you, and you were sending out invitations, and you said, come to my house for a birthday party. It's from January to July. That would be awesome. It would be a lot of cake. But that's what the king did, right? He has this huge party, and he's invited everybody, and they all come, and he tells everybody there's no limit on what you want to eat. Just come and eat and eat and eat, and it'll be awesome. And so they do, and they come. And then after he showed everybody his house, he showed everybody all of his things, all of his gold, how great his kingdom is, then he decides that he's going to show them how beautiful his wife is, Vashti, remember, who is the daughter of the king of Babylon. Now, I don't know if you've ever been a king or a queen before, but if you were and somebody took over your kingdom, how would you feel about that? Would you be happy? Yeah, that's how I think. Happy or sad? What if somebody came to your house and took all your toys away and then let you have like 3 of them? How would you feel? That's not fun at all. Maybe now we can start to appreciate how she feels. She used to be a princess, and now she's kind of still a princess, but it's not in her kingdom. It would be like somebody who had a really nice house, and they took your house away, and they brought you to their house and said, you can live in the doghouse. Right? We have a nice doghouse outside. It's painted. It'll keep you dry. Welcome to the family. You probably wouldn't be too happy with that. To show how not happy she is, what if I invited you to my birthday party and you said, I can't come because I'm having my own party at the exact same time as yours, and I'm inviting all of the same friends? How would you feel? That's right. Cooper, you would not be happy, would you? That would not be cool at all. Vashti could have gone to the king's party. She chose not to. She chose to have her own party. And for a long time, I thought, well, maybe they did things different. Maybe it's like kindergarten where you have girl parties and boy parties, or whenever that starts. But that's not the case, right? She could have gone. She probably should have gone, but she decided to have her own party with her own friends at the exact same time. Now, all of a sudden, maybe that shows you that the king and the queen, they don't really get along very much, and they're just kind of there because they're just there. So the king then calls the queen and says, hey, I want you to come to my party, and I want you to come show everybody how pretty you are. What does the queen say? No, that's right. Nope, just like that, right? And if you've ever seen the VeggieTale versions, he asked her to bring a sandwich along, and she refused, right? The king can get his own sandwich. That's, I think, the most quoted line in our house from VeggieTale's Esther. So that kind of happens. Now, how do you think the king feels? Is he going to be okay with that, or is he going to be sad, or how is he going to feel? How would you feel if you were the president of the world and you asked somebody to come to a party and they said no? Yes, exactly. Now, not only is it somebody who's not coming to your party, it's also like your best friend. Right? Imagine the person who's supposed to be your best friend. They've thrown a competing party. They're trying to take your friends away. And then when you ask them to come, they just flat out refuse to come. Would they be your best friend after that? No. I was in first grade one time, and the meanest thing that anybody ever said to me in first grade was, "You can't come to my birthday party." Right? That's like the worst. It doesn't get worse than that in first grade. You can tell me I'm not your friend, that's fine, but just still invite me to your birthday party. Well, that's kind of what happens here. He says, "Come to my party." The queen says no, and he says, "Well, fine, you can't be the queen anymore." And now that might seem like an overreaction, but remember, she just came, right? She is the daughter of the king of Babylon. So she is now a subject people. Right, her people, the place where she came, that now the Persian Empire owns it. And if the king just kind of says, "Oh, it's not that big of a deal," what do you think the other places are going to do? They're going to say, "Well, if the queen doesn't have to obey, maybe we don't have to obey either." And when you read through the story, some of the men are worried that none of the wives are going to want to go to the parties with their husbands, and we'll just have chaos, and there'll be two parties all the time, and we just can't buy two cakes. And the other issue is that not only are you going to start having to have two parties, but you might have people who decide they don't want to be part of Persia at all. And now not only do you have parties, but you also have wars, and wars are no fun. And so the king says, "We can't do this." And so he punishes the queen. And he says, "You can no longer be the queen." He's going to find a new queen. That gets us to chapter 2. So if you've got your Bible open, turn over to chapter 2 in Esther. And now the king is looking for a new queen. And now he's a very smart king. And so when he's going to look for a queen, he's going to look for the most important thing possible, which is her intelligence and her wit. Right? They send messengers out and they take all the smartest people and bring them back. Is that what happens? What does he do? The best artists? Is that who he gathers? Yes, Greg. The best woman? Maybe he finds her. I think he does eventually. But he says, "Bring all the pretty people." Right? And I didn't get an invitation, so I was highly offended. But he sent servants out throughout the kingdom, and they gathered everybody that they thought might be pretty to the king. And there is a man whose name is Mordecai, and he was Jewish, and he was brought from his hometown to now Persia. And he came to Babylon when he was probably a very, very little boy. When the Babylonians came to Jerusalem and they started taking people away, they took people away at least 3 times. Mordecai is probably in the second time that people are taken away. So he would have been like 2 or 3 years old, or maybe even a brand new baby. Does he have many memories of his home? Can you remember when you were 2? Well, you can, because you're just 3. Right? But no, I can't remember much when I'm 2. So Mordecai probably doesn't even remember what his home is like. All he has ever known is Babylon and now Persia. And he had family members who came with him, and one of his family members had a daughter whose name is Hadassah. Can everybody say that? Hadassah. That's Esther's real name. Her name is Hadassah. But how often do you hear people talk about the story of Hadassah in the Bible? We always call her by her Persian name, Esther. The same thing with Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. You might know them as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Those are their Chaldean names. But when we come, there's a reason why we call her Esther, because for a while she's going to hide who she is. She's not going to tell people. Now, she's not going to tell people for a few reasons. One of them is safety. Right? One of them is because she's worried that maybe the king won't pick her if he knows who she is. And one of the neat things is that when the king finally finds out who she is, it doesn't change his mind about her. Right? He liked her anyway. So you, as a person, should you ever hide who you are to make other people happy? Does that seem like a good idea? No? What if I called you Ralph? You're just Ralph now. I renamed you. Is that okay? Why? Well, what is your name, Ralph? Right, you're Dylan. Are you ever going to change your name for anybody? Well, maybe like mom or dad, right? Like if they say, we're going to call you George now, you might change your name then. But you don't hide who you are. What if I tried to change your favorite color for you? Or what if I was a really important person and so you pretended to like something that you really don't like? Do you like anchovies? So what if I loved anchovies and you came over to my house and you pretended to like them, and so for your birthday I bought you 2 truckloads of anchovies? Would that be cool? First, don't pretend that you're somebody else, because people will think that's who you really are. And then don't be surprised when they buy you weird birthday presents. Right? The other thing is that you shouldn't hide who you are, because God made you who you are, and you are wonderfully and fearfully made who you are. And so Esther is kind of in one of those weird situations where she doesn't know what to do. The people in her life are telling her, pretend you're somebody else. And so she does. And that's kind of what's going on in chapter 2. She's pretending to be Persian. The people are going to come and they're going to take her away because she's really pretty. And in fact, she's not only really pretty, she seems to also be a really nice person. Right? People seem to like her for who she is. Because one of the guys who's coming around, his name is Haggai, he's going to come and he's going to like her and he's going to give her special treatment. And so he's going to take her back to the palace. He's going to give her the best place to stay. He's going to give her the best food, the best makeup, the best perfume. He really likes her because probably she's different than other people. Right? The law that God gave to Israel, it's not just a bunch of rules about sacrifices and places to go and not places to go. It also is supposed to change who you are. Do you like it when people lie to you? Landon, how do you like that? Is it cool if I just randomly lie to you? No, why not? Yes. Do you think maybe one day when you get a job and you have a boss, does your boss want you to tell the truth? Yes. Or one day when you start your own company and you're running the company, do your employees expect you to tell them the truth? Yes. Do you think employees would want to work for you if you lied to them all the time? So, God tells us to tell the truth. Automatically, right, that makes you a better person. Because if you listen and you tell the truth all the time, I'll want to be your friend, the people next to you will want to be your friend, one day I'll get a job working for you, and it'll be great. But that's because you're listening to what God says. And so Esther is doing that. She is being the person that God called her to be, even though she's kind of pretending that she isn't really Jewish at this time. But everybody likes her. She doesn't reveal her ethnicity. You can see that in verse 10 of chapter 2. And there's a whole year now where she's getting ready to meet the king. How much time did you spend getting ready to come to services this morning? How long? 20 minutes? Yeah, 20 minutes. That's pretty good for somebody your age. 20 minutes is nice. Did anybody wake up, roll out of bed, put their shoes on, kind of push their hair down, and then head out the door? What if the president was coming? How long would you spend getting ready to meet the president of the United States? How long? Maybe a long time. Yeah, you might get a new haircut. You might go buy some new clothes. You might, get picture ready, because there's going to be a lot of pictures when you meet the president. Now, they didn't have pictures yet, but they did have paintings, right? So that took a long time. You had to stand very still. So we know that when somebody important is coming, we spend time getting ready. Esther spent a whole year getting ready to meet the king. And now, one of the things that we have to think of is that one day, now you're already in the presence of the king, but one day you will see that king face to face. Right now, you're getting ready to meet him. So how are you dressing yourself? And we're not talking about the clothes that you're wearing, but how are you getting ready to meet Jesus when he comes? And everybody kneels before him, and everybody confesses that he is the king. What are you putting on? How are you getting yourself ready? Yes. Oh, God's love. That's a great thing to wear. What else are we putting on? Yes. The armor of God. Yeah, so not only are we going to be dressed in love, we're going to be dressed in God's beautiful, this amazing armor that we have. Yes. Yeah, meekness and humility. Now, is it easy to be meek and humble? If you say yes, you're not meek and humble, right? It's a trick question, right? Is it easy to be brave and courageous all the time? To stand firm when you have people who are attacking you? No. Is it easy to be loving all the time? Do you ever get angry and you just say things you shouldn't, or maybe do things you shouldn't? Right, so we're spending our whole life getting ready to meet the king. And Esther does that here. She spends a year. It's not her life, but it's a really long time. I've never gotten ready to meet somebody for a year. And so when she does finally go and meet the king, he likes her, and he says, you get to be the queen now. And so now she is the queen, and everything is great, and that's the end of the story. Right? It's not the end of the story. Don't say yes. No. Because bad things happen sometimes to good people. Because God is not the only person running the universe, right? If God was the only person in the universe, would everything be perfect? Absolutely. But God made me. And he put me in the universe. And sometimes I do things that aren't perfect. God made us, and sometimes we do things that aren't perfect. There is the devil and all the demons, and so there are other people, other beings who do things that aren't perfect. And so in our story, things seem to be going really well up to this point for Esther, but now there's somebody who comes along who's going to start causing trouble. Now, there is a man whose name is Haman. How many of you have ever celebrated Purim? Somebody actually did. A couple people, yes? Okay. Do you like it when people give you presents? Yes? Then you will like Purim, right? Because that's what you do. You go around and people give you presents and you get to dress up in costumes and there's all sorts of colored dyes that you throw at each other. It's a blast, right? We should do that sometime. Purim is the Hebrew celebration around the book of Esther. Because there is a man who came along whose name is Haman, and he really doesn't like Jewish people. He hates them. And when you read through the book, you kind of get a hint why. He really doesn't like Mordecai because Mordecai won't bow down to him like everybody else. He really doesn't like the Jewish people because his great super great grandpa was named Agag. Who is Agag? Another fact to pull out of the air. Does anybody remember who Agag is? Yes. Yes, the king that King Saul was supposed to utterly defeat. Right? You can go over to 1 Samuel chapter 15, and Saul is told to utterly defeat the Amalekites. And their king, his name was Agag. Well, did Saul listen? Did he obey? No. Now, if you were a king in the ancient world, one of the things that you did to show everybody that you were king is that you had like 1 billion children. Right? Some of the kings in the Old Testament, they have like 70 kids. I have 8. There's no way I can imagine having 70. That would be a lot of work. And so Agag probably had a lot of kids. And when Saul comes and doesn't do what he's supposed to do, that means at least one of them apparently escaped. And he had kids and they had children all the way down until you get to this guy named Haman, who is an Agagite. That's fun to say. You can say it if you want. Haman the Agagite. It just means that he is the son of Agag. And so when he gets here and now he enters into the story, how do you think Haman feels that Israel beat up his family? What if somebody came into your house and like kicked your dog and ran away? How would you feel? Yeah. Well, we don't have a dog, so it would be funny to watch them come and like kick the air and then run off. Right, but you wouldn't be happy. You wouldn't be happy. Yes, thumbs down. So the Israelites and Haman don't get along. Now, Haman is the bad guy in the story, and the Israelites are the good guys in the story, and they're going to win. And so it's Israel's holiday, and they will get together around March every year, and they will dress up in costumes. They will give each other candies and presents, and they will sit down in families or big groups, and they will read the book of Esther. And when they read through the book of Esther, there's something special that they do. Every time that you say the name Haman, everybody hisses really loudly because you don't even want to hear his name mentioned. And so as we're going through the story, I have a very special request. You don't have to do it if you don't want to, but if you're under 12, it's mandatory. Every time the name Haman comes up, you should hiss very loudly so that we can't hear it. And I'm cheating, I have a microphone. but you just don't want to hear Haman's name. There, we're starting. Right. Okay, so from this point on, every time the H name is mentioned, it's kind of like Voldemort, he who must not be named, but I just named anyway. So as we're going through the story, every time you hear that name, you hiss, because we don't even want to hear his name. He's such a bad person. Okay, so the king, Ahasuerus, try saying that, right? Ahasuerus, let's just call him Xerxes. The king doesn't know about this bad relationship. Haman comes to the king and says, there are people in your kingdom who have their own law. And not only do they have their own law, but they separate themselves from everybody else, and they stay together. And not only that, they have their own God, and they don't like any of the others. They're dangerous. Now, if you were a king and you were just told that people in your kingdom have their own law, which you're the king, you're the one who makes the laws, they have their own laws, they have their own gods, and they don't want anything to do with most of the other people, how would that make you feel? So what would you say if Haman came to you and said, let's get rid of them? What would you say? Yes, that sounds like a great idea. Let's do that. We can't have these troublemakers in the kingdom. We need to make sure that they go away and never come back. So it seems like a good idea, and the king does that. Unfortunately, he doesn't know that he is married to somebody who he has just said should be gotten rid of. Because Esther didn't tell him that her real name is Hadassah and that she is Jewish. Now, if the king had known that, might that have changed his opinion? It could have. It could have. So that's why we don't change who we are for people. Because you might be the very person who can make a difference. Well, it turns out that Esther is going to make a difference because her cousin Mordecai comes to her and says, Esther, Haman has talked to the king and gotten him to sign an order that says our people are going to get beat up everywhere they live. And this is not only in Persia, it's also where else? Where do the Jewish people live? In Jerusalem. Right? They've gone back to Jerusalem, some of them have. And the king just said that you can beat them up and take their stuff wherever they are. Which means that even if you live in Jerusalem, you're not safe. And so how would you react if you were an Israelite? If you were from Judah, how would you feel? Is this good news or bad news? Yes. Just like that. And in fact, when you read the text, that's what it says. It says there was a lot of that going on. There was weeping and crying, and people were just in sackcloth and covering themselves in ashes. Have you ever done that? I've worn sackcloth one time, and it was to wear as a costume. I was dressing up as Goliath, and one of the kids was David. It was probably Stephen Thomas. It is the most uncomfortable thing I have ever worn in my entire life. It's awful. And not only did they cover themselves with this terrible clothing, they covered themselves with ashes too. So not only are you itchy and scratchy and everything's poking you everywhere, but you're also dirty and it gets in your mouth and in your nose. It's just terrible. You would only do this if you were really, really upset about something. And they're really, really upset because they're about to all die. That's a pretty good thing to be upset about. And so Mordecai comes to Esther and says, the king is going to kill all of your people. You need to tell him, and you need to get him to stop. And Esther, what does she say? What's the first thing she says? Right. Cooper said, nope. That's her reaction. Why? Because she's one person. What if somebody came to you and said, the president of the United States is going to cut Tennessee out and throw it into the ocean, and we need somebody to go tell him to stop? Do you think that you could do it? Why would they listen to you? You're just one person. Right? Sometimes we don't think that one person makes a difference, but one person does. One person makes a huge difference, especially if it's that one person who says no to something. Right? One day you might be with a whole group of people who are trying to get you to do something bad. And usually what happens when you have a group of people together is that there's one or two people who want to do the bad thing. There's 5 or 6 people who don't really want to, but they're going to go ahead and do it anyway. And then there's that one person who might stand up and say, no, we can't do that. We shouldn't do that. It's wrong. I was out with a group of friends one time, and we were just walking down the road, and there were cornfields on either side. And one of the kids in the group got the bright idea, hey, let's go steal some corn. It's not that big of a deal. It's just corn. Nobody will know. And I'm in the group, and I'm thinking, but we probably shouldn't steal the corn. But okay, you guys are older than me, and you're cool, and I want to fit in, and I don't want you to think that I'm going to not do it. And so, okay, I'll do it, but I'm terrified that the farmer's going to find me and run me over with his tractor. So I'm going along with this group, and there's a little kid, my brother, who we didn't even want to come with us because he's 7 years younger than me, and I was already the little one. My brother looked at everybody, and he said, "That's stealing. We can't steal the corn. It's not ours." And something amazing happened. The older kids who were really cool, who thought it would be funny to steal the corn, all of a sudden they said, "Yeah, that's not fun. Let's go do something else." Because one person said no. You're just one person, but you can make a difference in your friends' lives, in your family's lives, and maybe in a bunch of people's lives if you just be who you ought to be. And so eventually Esther says, "Okay, I'll do it." And now she's in a very dangerous situation because when she goes and talks to the king, you can see this in chapter 5, when she goes and talks to the king, if the king doesn't hold out a golden scepter to her, which is really weird. Do your parents ever do that to you? When you come to talk to them after supper and your father or mother are sitting in a chair, do they hold out a golden stick and then you can touch it and talk to them? We don't do that, not in our house, but we are now because it's in the Bible. Right? So Esther goes to the king, and he holds out the golden stick, and if he didn't do that, she would have been killed. So this is a big deal. Right? She's afraid that she might get killed, but she goes to talk to the king, and he holds the stick out, and she touches it, and then he says, "What do you want?" And she says, "I want you to come to my house. I'm going to have a party." And the king says, "Okay." And she says, "I also want you to invite Haman." There we go. We've got some hissing. Yeah, don't forget. We have to hiss. Right? And so everything's going great. And so she goes to her house and she makes the party. The king comes and Haman comes. And she doesn't ask the king to save her people. Have you ever started to do something? Maybe you were going to go talk to a friend about something, or maybe you were going to start on a really hard project, or maybe like homework, and you found a reason not to do it. It's like, "But my favorite show is coming on," or "I have to feed the dog," or "I have to clean my room." It's amazing how often you will clean your room to avoid doing homework. And that's the number one reason why my room got cleaned when I was growing up, is because I was trying to avoid something that was difficult. But we find reasons not to do something. And so Esther comes. I don't know if she's just trying to butter the king up, maybe make him more favorable, but she says, "Why don't you come back tomorrow, and I'll make another feast, and you can eat again, and I'll ask you then." So the king goes home, and he has maybe a dream. In chapter 6, it says he can't sleep. And so he opens up his book, and he starts looking through history. And so sometimes if you need to sleep, you can just read something that isn't incredibly interesting. And you might find something that is interesting. Like the king found out that somebody saved his life. Somebody named Mordecai. And so the king calls Haman in and says, "What should I do for somebody that I want to honor? What should I do for somebody that I want to show great honor to?" Yes? Well, what would you like? A bounce house. So if Greg is being honored, I should get a giant bounce house and invite all your friends, right? So whenever we have a bounce house, you are all invited. What would you like? Yes. A playground, a bounce house playground. Okay. I don't know what that is. Yes, Lily? Ice cream. So now we've got a bounce house, a playground, and ice cream. This is getting better. Yes. What was that? A trampoline. A trampoline. We can jump off the trampoline onto the bounce house, or maybe the bounce house onto the trampoline, and then go to the playground and eat ice cream. Or this is getting better and better and better. And we can probably imagine all sorts of things that we would do. And if somebody said, "Hey, how should I throw a party for somebody?" If you thought the party was for you, you would say all these cool things, right? So what if you did that? What if you said, "Oh, yeah, I want a bounce house, a trampoline, ice cream, a playground," and then I did that, but it was not for you? How would you feel? Sad? Maybe. Upset? Annoyed? Good vocabulary. Cooper and Landon gave the thumbs down. Yes. Yeah, disappointed. Because you thought it was for you. But it's for somebody else. So the king asks Haman, what should I do to show honor to somebody? And Haman comes up with this grand thing because he thinks it's for him. And it turns out it's for Mordecai, that guy that he hates. And so they have to march around town, and he has to tell everybody how great Mordecai is, and how Mordecai gets to ride on the king's horse, and everybody sees Mordecai dressed in these beautiful clothes. And now everybody thinks Mordecai is great. But you know, sometimes that happens. Maybe sometimes you're at home, and your parents talk about how great one of your brothers or sisters is. Or maybe you're at school and the teacher talks about how great a job somebody else in the class did. Does that change you at all? No, it doesn't. Right? If somebody else did great on a test and you did pretty good too, did you do a bad job now? No. So what should we do if somebody else gets honor? Should you be upset? Yeah. You should be glad for them. Now, Mordecai and this other guy, who we won't say yet, they don't get along. So there's a reason why he's upset. But if somebody else is being praised, you should be happy for them. You should be encouraged, and you should encourage them too. So now we get back into the story, and they come back to dinner the next night, and the king is there, and Esther is there, and Haman is there. And the queen looks to the king and says, somebody is going to kill me and all of my people. What does the king say? You think he's happy? He's like, finally. No. He says, who? Who is going to hurt my queen? Who is going to do this? And Esther turns and looks at Haman and says, him. And the king is furious, and he stands up and he leaves immediately. Now, if you're ever in a meeting and somebody looks really mad and they stare at you and they go, "Argh," and then they leave, do you think they're going to come back and do something bad? Yes, right? And that's exactly what's going to happen. So Haman realizes that he has one chance. He throws himself down at Esther's feet to beg for her forgiveness. It just so happens, though, that the king comes in and he sees this and he thinks that he's trying to beat the queen up. And he says, this is not okay. And immediately he has him taken away. Now there's a couple lessons there. The first is be careful about rushing to judgment. Things aren't always what they look like. The second thing is that you have to be careful how other people see what you do. Sometimes you're cleaning something and maybe you break it and somebody else sees it and it looks like you broke it on purpose. Right? So you have to be very careful. Sometimes you're trying to be helpful and people think you're trying to hurt them. So you have to be very careful. But we also have to make sure we don't rush to judgment. So Haman will be taken away, and he and his family will have bad things happen to them, and all of the Jewish people will be saved. The king will change the law. He will say that the Jewish people can defend themselves, and so now they have a giant party. It's happened on the 13th and the 14th days of the month, and even in some places to the 16th. And so that's now the Hebrew people have a feast called Purim, where they get together once a year, and they read through the book of Esther, and they tell the story. And every time they say Haman's name, all the children, they hiss, the whole house hisses so that you can't hear the name. And they talk about the bravery of Mordecai and Esther, and how brave and dedicated Mordecai was to make sure that Esther was taken care of, how brave Esther was to stand up to the king, right, to go into his presence and to ask for the salvation of her people. Now there are some beautiful pictures here that we see in the Bible. Right? The salvation for the Jewish people came through whom? Who saved the Jewish people? Esther. Esther did. In the garden, back in the garden, when God tells the serpent that it's cursed, whose child is going to crush the head of the serpent? The woman's. The woman's. All right. Now, you fast forward like 6,000 years, and you get to a young woman named Mary who has a baby, and the baby's name is Jesus. And Jesus is the king. and you have a woman giving birth to the Savior who will save the Lord's people. And there's an even cooler picture. You can back up a little bit. What does God call the church? The church is his bride, right? She is a woman. And she comes to the king asking for salvation. And all of the people who are part of that church will be saved. And so you kind of see these pictures in the Bible. One of the reasons why it's important to look at stories like Esther and Ruth and all of the things that we'll see in the Old Testament and even some of the stories in the New Testament, the reason why it's important is because in those moments you see a picture of the salvation that God has been telling people about from the very beginning of time. So Esther is this really cool story about a woman who was brave. And in that moment of bravery, that few moments of bravery, we see not only the salvation of the people alive in that day, but we see the salvation of God's people in all time shown to us in a moment. Thank you so much for being in class today. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for all your hissing. Thank you for all your answers. It has been a lot of fun. We may do this again next week. We may not. We just have to wait and see. But if we do, there will be coloring pages for you. We'll have something else that we can hiss at, and it will be a lot of fun. I love you all very much, and